Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman with Elisa Marie and Joji. Today, we're going to be talking about something that may not be very relative to Elisa and I, but it's something that caught my eye and wanted to understand how somebody who was 20 some years or at least 15 years younger than me feels, and trying to understand who and what this trend is about. And so this is what we're talking about is, I think it's pronounced NATO dating or NATO, and this stands for not attached to an outcome. And so I think it's pretty fascinating because most of us in the times we were raised, whether it's a family influence or society's influence, especially imposed on women, I think there was a real direction put towards marriage. And so what this group of individuals are saying is that with the different dating apps out there, there's a trend. And the article is a psychologist explores the NATO dating trend, and it is in Forbes magazine. It was authored by Mark Travers, and this is from January 2024. So, Alyssa, I'm going to have you give us your initial thoughts about it, given the fact that you're closer to the dating time in your life than I am. But what do you make of this, and how different or similar is it from how you approached dating as you were ready to find a part? Well, this would be, I guess, at any time, not necessarily here. I was going to say find a partner, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just the process or the experience of dating.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting concept. So we were kind of talking about it before we jumped on. And I think that it's probably counter to what was kind of ingrained in me, I think, from society as well as just, I don't know that my family ever explicitly said, you date to find a mate. But I think that that was a pretty popular thing. I remember in college, some of the girls in my dorm were saying like I'm here to find a partner. Like they were in college, but they, their goal wasn't necessarily to get a college degree. It was to find a partner. And I was not in that mentality at that time. I had aspirations for my career and was really focused on what I wanted to do. So I didn't have that at that time. So I think maybe very early on in my, early 20s, my goal was more of maybe the NATO approach of just kind of getting out there, meeting different people, seeing what I did and didn't like. But as I got older and probably my late 20s, that was when I was really focused on, okay, my career is pretty set. I'm, early into, I think that was when I was like finishing up graduate school. And so for me, it was at that point in time, I'm ready to settle down and find somebody who I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. And so I very rarely, I think I had mentioned to you, I very rarely went on second dates. I go on a first date, and if it wasn't sparks and chemistry and a lot of things in common, there really wasn't any point in my mind to continue that relationship. And so I think that, again, it's two different trends, and maybe I had a little bit of that, but I definitely don't think I consciously said, I'm going to date to kind of have that experience without that kind of end goal in mind.
And I think that what you're, subtly referencing is the time in your life where NATO dating might have made sense in how you were approaching it, and definitely the way that I was approaching it. But this article, as I remember it, didn't really talk about a specific age group or demographic. It almost made a very generalization on some of the trends from the dating apps. And so it could be any age. We don't know what it is, but I agree with you. I think that when you're in your, your early college years, you're not really maybe focused on, meeting your mate. Some of you, it sounds like some of your friends were, and some of my friends were, but I don't think most people are. Most people are just trying to find the direction of their career and what they want to do. And I think exactly the way you described it, as you get older and maybe you're settled in your education, you are doing the training that is going to now, give you the job. And I think as those pieces fall into place, then I think, the mind sort of opens up to, okay, so what comes after this? And I think for most people, maybe in the times when we were being, growing up. So maybe we're not that different. I'm 56, you're late 30s or early 40s, that, the goal was still maybe to find a life partner once some of those other parts of your life had settled down. But this doesn't really say anything about age. So it leaves it pretty open and leaves it to interpretation as to what it almost feels like this is a greater trend. The trend is that it's not defined by age, it's more of a preference for people. So I don't know what you think about that. I have some thoughts about, my future and what would happen if I was to be single again. But do you have any additional thoughts about, say, 30 and 40-year olds maybe having that difference of expectation from dating and not having an outcome attached to the process of dating?
Well, I think so I just turned 40, so I'm like late for like those early millennials. And I think that what I'm seeing in the people around me, because I work majority of the people that I work with are in their early to mid 30s. A lot of my friends are, around the same demographic, like late 30s, early 40s. And, I think as a woman, you have a biological clock. And so I think that while in theory, it's a great idea to be able to kind of search and learn what you like and learn what you don't like and that exploration, I think that what I am hearing and what I'm kind of seeing from a lot of my friends is for those that are not in committed relationship, and I have quite a few, some of my very close friends are not in a relationship currently. And again, we're in our early 40s, and they the message that keeps coming back up is, I may not have kids, or I may not pursue that because of my age. And so I think in some ways, while I don't know, I mean, I know that you said that the article, I don't know if it touched on that or if it had any mention of it, but I think that the biological clock does motivate people to say, okay, there has to be this kind of point where I have to now look for a long term mate. Now, we know that there's lots of people who do also, you know, single parents who have children by, not really focus on necessarily the partner piece of that, but they have children. But I still think that that plays a role. I think that that's something that we can't, necessarily not acknowledge that that biological clock is going. And so if you're going to just kind of, I think it's much different for women than it is for men, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you were thinking about that or talking about that. It made me think about a couple I am reflecting on, and they don't seem to have like a very, I mean, I think they're in a committed relationship, but I don't necessarily think that they've spent a lot of time talking about future planning. And I don't know enough about this couple to know how long they've been together. But one of the conversations I had recently with the female partner was exactly your point. Like, there's a finite amount of time that I have if I want to have children, and I know that I feel deeply that I would like to have my own children. And so that did, though, then raise the question for her as to, well, what do you do with that? Right. I mean, I'm the way I understood the conversation was I'm happy where things are going now. Like we have a good relationship. We have good time together. We're in a committed relationship, but we haven't really spoken about how does children fit into this picture? What if I want to have children and you're not ready for children? Like all that. And I got the sense that, it's not something that she has broached with her partner, but that it is something because of that female clock is something that she's thinking about and wondering when is it appropriate to bring it up, or is that a singular decision? Does it only impact her? And I think that that's part of the sort of the definition of this conversation. So this might be a good time to, as I said, this is like a psychologist's take on this. And so as the psychologist is, and it could very well be that the author is a psychologist, the way that this article is written. But basically, the article goes on to say, what are the benefits of NATO? So the first thing that's mentioned is pursuing mindful partnerships. And what that really means is, approaching a relationship with a sense of awareness, intentionality, and presence. So very much like being mindful, and we've used that word a lot in this podcast. So being present and being mindful of the relationship. The second thing that he mentions is prioritizing personal growth. So it's not necessarily the idea, it feels like, that two people will become one and join and become one unit, that there are individuals within this relationship, however you define that relationship. Third thing is embracing singlehood. And so continuing that idea of two people remaining to be sort of in their own lane and not looking to force a merging of two lives, understanding that this may continue to be singlehood for each of the partners and to see how that plays out. Seeking meaningful experiences. So doing things together that are a shared experience that creates fulfillment and meaning, but doesn't necessarily symbolize something that's going to, end at a certain goal for both people. And that well-being and what it means in their life to be in a relationship and experience this with the other person is more important than we're going to end up here. And this is the ultimate goal. Finally, assessing true compatibility. And so it really talks about the fact that visualizing a future with a potential partner isn't wrong. Sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. And so adopting a NATO dating approach, at least during the initial stages of dating, allows for more of an objective evaluation of compatibility. And I will say that this is something that I feel I've heard from a lot of women who are single, whether they're divorced and newly single, whether they're single moms and not in a partnership, or they are in their late 20s and into their 30s, is that they feel that there's a lot more prioritization of compatibility. This is not about, can I be with this person forever? It's really about how well do we get along as being the bigger focus than maybe, I was raised by my parents to really, believe that you're never going to find the perfect partner, that this is a relationship that you're navigating, and true love or long lasting love is about compromising, and how do you bring two different people's viewpoints together so that both people can be happy. And it's not necessarily that the female has to give it up all the time or the male has to give in all the time, but that there's going to be taking turns to continue each person having a role in finding a common ground. So, do any of those things that I mentioned resonate with you, Alyssa? Like the compatibility is something I've heard about from, women. Have any of the other things I mentioned fit with anything you've thought about as we've talked about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so I think when we first started talking, I was thinking about, we were talking about early people in the early 20s who maybe are not, ready to commit. But then as you were talking about those, the embracing singledom or, being single and really enhancing the compatibility and making sure that this person is a good fit for you. I was thinking about individuals, and I have some friends that also fall in that category, or that are recently divorced. They might have children from, a previous relationship, and they would probably fall into that category as well as wanting to, find compatibility, but also, not necessarily looking for a long-term relationship or necessarily to, jump into another marriage, but rather to really seek out and develop what do they want now at this new stage of their life. And so I actually was thinking like, oh, this probably applies to a lot more people than I initially thought of because I was thinking, well, people who are younger are probably looking at that, but probably people in all phases of life would be wanting to do that even if they maybe have had a long-term relationship and now are looking to switch to, really doing some soul searching. And I'd like to have somebody here to experience things, travel with, but not necessarily commit for the long term. And that's not necessarily what I need at this time. So that's what I was thinking of as you were describing that. And so I think that it does apply and can be kind of a movement for a much larger group of people than I initially thought.
And I think as you were speaking, what that also got me to consider is the empowerment of women and our sexuality. And I say that with some individuals that I'm thinking of who are, probably in their 70s and 80s. And I've had one of my friends' moms who got married in her like mid 70s and 80s because the thought of being sexually active with a gentleman that she wasn't married to didn't fit in her upbringing, in her lifestyle, even though none of the individuals that really shaped that were still around. But I think there was some concern about, well, how will my children judge me, my adult children, now my grandchildren? And so I do feel like, that's one population of a much older generation that may be tied to more conservative sexual views. And then on the other side, I also have some of my friends who have been single now for a long time, whether they've been widowed or whether they've been divorced, where they've been, I think, originally after the death of their spouse or with their divorce, they were really hoping to find another partner. So these are people I'm thinking about in their 60s to maybe early 70s, the people I'm thinking of that were hoping that they wouldn't spend the next majority of their life alone. But however, the way that things turned out, they have not been able to find a partner for a variety of reasons, not because they haven't tried, but because the folks that they ran into weren't people that they felt that they wanted for one reason or another not to spend time with permanently and decided not even to have a committed relationship. And I know that one of my friends said to me, I'm okay with being single. She said, I didn't think that 5 years ago, but now I realize that there are worse things off than being single, like being with an individual for the purpose of being with somebody else who might, have behaviors that don't fit with my life view. Somebody who might have anger management issues or, might have adult children who they don't stand up to. And then the female in this situation is made to feel like a second class citizen or, not part of the family unit. And so there are situations where I think that decisions are made like that. I'm not that desperate to be in a relationship where I'm willing to compromise, my sense of who I am. But I think there's also a certain freedom to say, given the fact that I've reached this point, that doesn't prohibit me from being sexually active with a gentleman or a partner if I feel attracted to that person. And I think that that is a very specific, kind of, open-mindedness or livelihood, which I think that people in their 20s also share. I don't think that I have met very many 20 or 30-year-olds who feel that they should save themselves for marriage. And I'm not judging that to be a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just stating that that is what I feel is the predominant view on sexuality. And I think that has a lot to do with just how women have evolved and the fact that sexuality is not, isn't there's no gatekeeper to that in terms of, well, you have to save yourself to get marriage anymore, is my impression. Not to say that there aren't plenty of people who do that and plenty of people who, for family reasons or religious reasons or other reasons, feel like that's the right way to be in their life. And that's absolutely fine. I'm not judging that. I'm just saying that I think there's younger people who believe that they could be sexually active and not go for an outcome of marriage. And I think there are some people that I know also at the other end of the spectrum in their 50s, 60s, and early 70s that feel very similar based on my friendship group. And so I think that that's sort of, and I'm not trying to, open Pandora's box talking about sexuality, but I don't think that we can deny the fact that women as a group have evolved in some restrictions being taken off of them when it comes to, key issues like sexuality. Do you have any reaction to that, Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's 100% true, and I think that I think that that's a topic that's not discussed as much, and I think that, I think that it's one of those kind of things where people have to step back and think about, well, why do I believe what I believe? Is it, the some of the older kind of concepts and mentalities were for certain reasons, but do those apply? And I think that it's a great point that, that sexuality may play a role in this as well.
Yep. And I also think that given the one other thing I was thinking about when you were speaking was that with the high rate of divorce, I think that there are people out there that don't necessarily want to be in a relationship only for it to end because maybe they rushed it, or that they were so in love with the idea of getting married that they didn't realize how difficult marriage is and how much you do sacrifice and you do compromise for each other. And I would see that as, I mean, I haven't had a lot of people say that to me, but it's something that I feel like if the divorce rates are so high, and then you've got women without children who are divorced and men without children who are divorced, and or people who have children soon after they get married who now then get divorced because they hadn't really had a strong foundation or really knew each other whether they were compatible. Now they have young children whose lives are also being impacted by divorce. And so I do feel like that's also something that might be a factor in people having relationships without an outcome attached to it, because that outcome is also could be a little precarious. I mean, it really, there's a lot that goes into that. And are they ready for all of that responsibility?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, like, I think a lot of times, and we do know for a fact that over 50% of marriages end in divorce. And so because of that, I think that people do, because kind of I'm like tying it all together. Because of that biological clock, some women rush in or say, okay, I've gotten to this point, like, whatever, I got to find somebody now. And I'm not saying that that's the mentality for women across the board, but I do think that there's a group of women who are in this camp of, I have to hurry up, find somebody so that I can have kids and like check these boxes off. And then that rushing in results in, you know, really not having the opportunity to go back and do those things that we were saying are benefits of this. Not being able to embrace being single, not being able to determine if there is compatibility, but rather I have to get to this end point quicker than I can really fully grasp or fully embrace myself, or I don't know what the word is that I'm thinking, but like put myself into that. And so I think that there are benefits to being able to have that time to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to go into this with any preconceived notions of what this should end in, but just kind of see where it goes and enjoy this. But I think that it definitely, your phase of life will impact whether you embrace that more so or not.
Right. And the one thing that the author talks about is the fact that, NATO dating should not be confused with avoiding intimacy or wanting to be a serial dater and taking advantage of the situation, just to date a lot or date a lot of women or men, or to be sexually promiscuous. Or I mean, that's not the alternative to, that's not the reasoning behind this. This is really more about enjoying the dating process and giving the freedom to enjoy that time together without taking advantage of anybody. There's not a manipulation here or anything like that. And he makes a very clear distinction about that. And I think that's an important distinction because we're trying, I think that when you're talking about being present and being mindful, excuse me, and also enjoying your and embracing your singlehood, that's not at the cost of hurting somebody else who might have a different desire than you do, right? You both got to be on the same page about that. And so I think that that's also an important point. This is not permission to just go do whatever you want. And I think that there are people who do that. We know that from the dating world that there are people who do manipulate ideas like this to give themselves the leeway to do whatever they want and have a built-in excuse. That is not at the heart of what NATO dating is. It is a healthy way to have a relationship without predetermining or putting pressure on the relationship that needs to amount to something. But that doesn't mean that you also need to be disrespectful or improper in your relationships with your partners either. So I think that that sort of talks about the two sort of it talks about the full breadth of this kind of dating. Are there any other thoughts that you have, Alyssa, that could add? I think that there were some salient points that we were making before we jumped on the record button. And that's always the danger when we start talking about a topic before we start recording, because I think we made some, I thought, interesting points, but at this moment, I can't remember what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've kind of touched on them because I think we were talking about like the kind of the mentality that we went into dating and how that shifts. But I think we've come full circle in some ways because I think I was very much like this was a 20-year-old, early 20s phase of life, carefree attitude. But then I think at least for myself, I've come full circle to say, well, actually, this can apply to a lot more people and is not necessarily something that isn't outside the realm of something that I or, my friends or those that surround myself would experience. I think that it can touch everybody in different ways. And it's not something to necessarily just throw out the window and be like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. So move on. Because I think that at the core of it, understanding what you're looking for in a relationship and maybe remedying some of those, like, I was talking about when people rush into things and have these expectations. Maybe this is a way to remedy some of that by slowing down, being mindful, and getting into a relationship where you have the opportunity to not have those expectations, but to go into it kind of anticipating that I'm just going to enjoy this for what it is. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. It's something that it's not necessarily something that we should just throw out, entirely and ignore.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's a good reminder for both of us and our listeners that there are many forms that relationships take. And I guess what Alyssa is also saying is that when we first started talking about this to each other, we had a pretty narrow perspective of what would that be. And we both discounted ourselves. And maybe that wouldn't be something that would appeal to us at our point in our lives and stuff. And then I think that as we talked about it, there is a lot of applications for it that might be applicable to us in certain circumstances. But also I think it helps us not judge other choices that people make, and I think that it's very easy to be judgmental of different people's choices. And I think that the way that we continue to progress is to be able to understand the reasoning behind somebody's choices. And so I feel like that is an important point to make as well. And so if it helps somebody understand this concept or hear of this concept, and have an open mind as somebody is talking about their dating journey, then I think that, we've done a community service. I think we should pat ourselves on the back there, Alyssa, because I think that it was a novel idea to us. We sort of approached it in a certain way, and then we kept expanding that definition and created some inclusion for a lot of different people from, early 20s all the way through, some of my friends who are in their late 70s and early 80s. And so I think that covers a lot of different people. And I think that we opened some doors that maybe we didn't initially think we would, when we first started talking. And so I don't know if you wouldn't mind closing us out, unless you have some other comments you'd like to add.
No, I'd be happy to, and I think that this encompasses. I appreciate that, Joji, because I think that that's what we're here to do. We're here to have those conversations, open up the doors, have some sort of introduction to new topics, and we're never shy to talk about things that maybe don't apply to us directly, but we hopefully bring some perspective, and then that continues the conversation. So if you would like to tell us what you thought of this episode, we'd love to hear from you, either at our email, which is thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook at the Deconstructed Woman Podcast. We have our Facebook group where we post episodes as well as try to get conversations going about these certain topics. And you're always welcome, depending on what platform you're on, you can send us a voice message and we would love to hear from you as well. So feel free to contact us, get in touch, let us know what you're thinking. And we hope that this has opened up those conversations, and we will talk next time.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.